This is our second event. Last week we convened. We had an open office hours where we reviewed some of the Ally support materials, and we had our first meeting of the Ally Research SIG. It was really exciting to bring folks together and start to share a little bit of some ideas and some direction for how we might research Ally and the impacts Ally may be making on campuses as far as accessibility and universal design for learning. So we got some really exciting conversations started there. I also wanted to point to our next Forum Series event that's going to be on October 3rd. It's featuring Brian Barrett and Walt Hebern from Fresno State. They're going to be talking about their recent Ally pilot and some of the work they've done in trying to research the pilot. So very exciting talk. That's going to be October 3rd. I'm dropping in a link to that session description in the chat. And today, I'm very excited to introduce and hear from Christopher Phillips of Utah State University. Christopher has been doing some really great work around Ally and around accessibility. He's the Electronic and Information Technology Accessibility Coordinator at Utah State. He's been helping to lead the USU's rollout of Ally. He's a lot of knowledge and experience implementing different accessibility tools and checkers, and is really passionate about how accessibility can benefit all learners. So with that, I will pass the mic to Christopher. He's going to do his presentation here. Feel free, I'll moderate the chat, and so if questions are popping up or things, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then hopefully at the end we'll have a little bit more time for some Q&A and some discussion. So with that, Christopher, if you're all good on the technical side, I'll let you go ahead and get started.
I think we're all set. Thank you so much. Everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up from somebody. That's great. Okay, thank you so much. I'm only on one screen, so yeah, if you can let me know of any questions that come up in the chat, John, that would be fantastic. So excited to present today and share some of the stuff that we're doing at Utah State. This is, if any of you were at InstructureCon, the Canvas annual conference this year, shared a few of these ideas here, but I've updated a few things and excited to talk through some of this today. By way of quick introduction, again, John mentioned my role here at Utah State. The link I shared in the chat just a minute ago is there on the slides, and I'll share it at the end as well. There's just a few resources there, some of the links we will discuss today, as well as the slides and contact information you can grab there if anybody's interested. If you want to wait to the end of the presentation, see if there's anything worth grabbing, that's great as well. By way of just quick introduction, I just wanted to take a minute and share just about me a little bit. This picture, every Wednesday afternoon, in fact, so today's the day, I get to go to Maverick with two of my younger brothers. Patrick on the left is just 11 months younger than I am, and so we're the same age every year for about a month, Irish twins. And then that's my youngest brother, Dallin Paul. And so fairly early on, I mean, as far back as I can remember, disability has been a pretty big part of my life, and I came to recognize just again as a young child some of the injustices and like why on earth wouldn't Patrick be able to do or participate or be a part of anything that I was able to do and participate and be a part of. And I had an incredible mother and parents really that really have fought a lot of battles all growing up, and as it came, as I kind of came to a place where I was ready to choose a career, it was a fairly easy decision kind of on the type of work I wanted to do. And I've worked in the disability field as a special educator in different areas around web accessibility, and now in a university setting most of my life. And so but it's always a good reminder for me sometimes just to think back to the why of why I'm doing this. And each of you on the presentation today probably have your own why that you could share. But that's just a little bit about me and who I am and why I'm doing this work. Just a real quick background on Utah State University. We're a land grant public university, public research university in northern Utah, in Logan, where we have just over or about 27,000 students, I think. One kind of unique thing about our campus is we are an extension campus. We have kind of extension or regional campuses all over the state, I think in 29 of the 30 counties across Utah. And so we have students, our main campus is here in Logan, but we do have students all over, which is presents some interesting kind of challenges and opportunities. As John mentioned, I'm the EIT accessibility coordinator here, hired just about 3 years ago. Before that, we didn't have this role on campus, and I think that's something a lot of campuses are kind of grappling with they have the accessibility or disability resource center that kind of takes care of individual student needs, but looking at a role to kind of address campus-wide accessibility issues. One of the first tasks that I had here was to help establish a policy. This policy is available in the links if anybody's interested. But we've really felt a tremendous amount of support here on our campus. We're fortunate to have WebAIM on our campus as well. Many of you might be familiar with WebAIM and the great work they do. And so some good kind of foundational work had been done. But we've got this policy in place now and are just working on how do we implement this and how do we work with all the different groups on campus to kind of help them understand the value of accessibility, why it's important for all of our students and employees, anybody else who interacts with university content. And generally, the conversations go pretty well. People want to do the right thing. It's just kind of finding time to meet with everybody and to have all of those conversations. But today we'll focus specifically on accessibility in the learning management system or online content. And I want to talk a little bit to start with this difference between kind of reactive accessibility. And this is something that everybody's going to be very familiar with. And if you're on a campus where maybe there's not a lot happening or this work is newer, this is probably where you're going to start in general, is making sure that you're able to reactively make content accessible for students with disabilities. And so this is the type of a thing where a student who requires an accommodation goes into an accommodation or accessibility disability resource center is what ours is called. They would provide documentation of their disability and then be granted kind of a list of accommodations that could be applied for that student. And so then when a student signs up for a course, that you're able to kind of say, oh, there's a student in this course who requires captions, for example, or files to be made accessible, and you can go in and make those files or that content accessible before the semester begins. And this really is kind of, it's really essential to make sure this work is in place and that you have the processes and people in place to kind of take care of students with identified accommodation needs. I'm hearing a couple beeps from the comments. Anything to discuss? I'll keep going, but feel free to jump in at any point if there's any questions.
Yeah, I responded to it, Christopher.
Thank you.
A question related to where they could find the policy document.
Fantastic, thank you. And we want to address reactive accessibility, but once you have really gotten kind of this reactive accessibility and these processes down, then it really opens up some exciting opportunities to start looking at what I refer to maybe as more of a proactive, inclusive approach. Starting to think about what kinds of things can we do across all of our courses that are going to make our content more accessible and also more usable for everyone. This reactive accessibility is often very focused on a specific individual with a specific disability generally, and is often kind of compliance maybe directed. It's something that you have to do, you're legally required to do. And again, it's essential work and important, but it's very different from this proactive inclusion work, where you're looking at what kinds of things can we do that are going to benefit a number of different students in a number of different contexts. Let's look at a couple of examples. First of all, just to put this kind of challenge in perspective, this is just a sample of numbers from our spring 2018 course. And some of you are bigger than this or smaller than this, but regardless, it's probably going to be the numbers, the amount of content that you have to do to make accessible is probably more than you're able to actually get to, at least in a limited time frame. At Utah State, we had over 3,100 Canvas courses. We looked at the numbers on that, about 150,000 kind of Canvas content items. That's things like quizzes, pages, assignments, and then over 260,000 files and images. Ally's obviously fantastic to help you kind of get a handle on this number. And I don't know, and we haven't crunched all the time of how much it would take to review or make each of these accessible, but it's a lot, and it's more than we have time to do right off the bat. And so we kind of acknowledge, and part of this is acknowledging we're just not going to be able to make all of this content completely accessible to everybody this semester, for example. Over the long term, we hope to continue to pick away at this and make progress and have more and more of our content be accessible. But acknowledging that we maybe can't do everything, it then opens up some opportunities for us to start to think about what can we do, what's going to be most important, and what can make the biggest difference. And that's a conversation that, for me at least, was initially a little bit uncomfortable. As an accessibility specialist, a lot of my work has always been kind of focused on specific audiences. So for example, what can we do for our students who are blind or have vision loss, or what can we do for our students who are deaf or have hard of hearing? Now those groups, again, for individual students, we have to meet their specific accommodation requirements, and that's essential work. But as you look at the number of those students and the number of students overall, there's some opportunities, I think, to kind of consider what work is most important. Let's just look at a couple of examples. As we do this, before we jump into those examples, just to talk a little bit about the idea of the curb cut effect. And many of you might be familiar with this, but curb cuts, mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act, before that, they didn't really exist. I mean, maybe in a few exceptions, but curb cuts were required by law. And all of a sudden you had a number of businesses and business owners who were really put out by this requirement to put in these curb cuts from their sidewalks to their streets. And some of the complaints might be familiar to some of you, the idea of, we don't even have customers in wheelchairs coming to our store. And there's, the irony there, of course, or why do we need to do this? We need to go back and, it's expensive. But it turns out as we put in curb cuts, the curb cuts end up being useful to a number of different people. And just for a second, let's just give you a chance to think about that and shout out some of those use cases where curb cuts are helpful. Feel free to put them in the chat, and then John, you can shout them out, or if you want to hop on the mic, if you can do that and shout out your response that way.
Yeah, so Sherry just commented strollers, Marisha commented bikes, Michael Shelmet, large deliveries, general difficulty in walking, suitcases at the airport from Holly. So yeah, some really interesting examples of how those curb cuts benefit everyone.
Perfect. You guys are right on top of this and nailed a lot of these. Most of these were mentioned in the comments, but whether it be grocery carts, strollers, luggage, skateboards, bikes, a number of other ones that were mentioned there as well. Curb cuts are just something that are generally universally used by most people in one context or another. That if the legal requirement for curb cuts were to go away today, people would still probably keep building curb cuts just because they make such a difference to so many people. They're certainly essential and required for somebody maybe with a mobility who uses a wheelchair or a walker or something like that. But but something that is so useful to so many different people. And that's what we really want to kind of look at as we think about this proactive accessibility. As we're able to prioritize ourselves, what kind of work we want to do, what are some of those? And this is Canvas, but it really could be Canvas, Blackboard, LMS, curb cuts that we can implement in our online courses that are going to make our content more accessible, more usable, and more learnable for everybody. With that, let's look at a couple of examples. First one is going to be captioning. And again, if you're doing any work in the accessibility arena, you've worked with captions. Captions are going to be, again, essential for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. Take a second and just throw into the chat again some of the other valuable or scenarios where captions are useful to other learners as well. Where are captions helpful?
All right, we've got some answers coming in. We've got Corinna from Emerson College mentioned students watching videos without headphones, or Marisha mentions being in the library with no headphones, speakers with accents, places with lots of background noise, you can't have the sound on, searching content for study purposes, loud environments, and here's a nice one from Sue, second language students.
Perfect. Good. And you can see we can go on, but captions are one of those things where we're getting requests more and more from instructors or sometimes students where there is no accommodation requirement. It's just something that they recognize as being valuable and useful. All those that were mentioned are fantastic. Some of you have seen the interactive transcript players that are increasingly available in a number of video players and allow students to kind of search for content and skip to it. All of these reasons are fantastic kind of and make captions valuable to a number of students. We run some analytics on our videos to kind of see how many videos are captioned or not just that are captioned, but that how often those captions are used, and it's far beyond just the audience of those who have an accommodation request. And so captions are one of those things that we can kind of think of as an LMS curb cut, something that's going to be useful to a number of different students in a number of different scenarios. Now I want to look at another example. Alt text. This is one that if you go to any kind of accessibility 101 course that you're going to often be exposed to or shared, that when you have an image, that it's going to be essential to add alt text to that image, and so that a student who uses assistive technology, students who are blind or low vision, this is going to come in handy a lot, that alt text is going to be required for those students. However, as a user, now is Nicholas on the call today? Is he on the presentation?
He is not. He is.
Okay.
Yeah, he's on vacation in Yellowstone, actually.
Oh, good for him. That's fantastic. And he has some different thoughts on this, and I was going to let him kind of represent maybe his thinking. But the idea here is that as you compare, a caption video with an alt text. Now, there are scenarios where alt text may be useful to some users with a disability. But for me, at least, I know in my personal experience, I use captions all the time as a non-disabled user. I use captions all the time, and I very rarely use alt text. And again, I don't want to imply at all that alt text isn't essential, that it isn't important for some users. But as we look at that, again, knowing that we have our reactive processes in place to make sure alt text is available to those who need it, and then as we consider our proactive work, I think there's a real opportunity to kind of start to look at different accessibility requirements like captioning or like alt text to determine where can we get the biggest bang for our buck? How can we make the most difference for the most students? And again, this idea is out there a little bit, and I'll go into some other examples. And I'd love to hear feedback as well from any of you. One of the things I think as we work with instructors on campus to kind of get them excited about accessibility beyond just having to do this because of a policy or a requirement, but helping them to really recognize and see the value of what they're doing for all students. And so for some faculty they really get accessibility, and they're going to go into every PowerPoint and make every image, add alt text to every image, and that's fantastic. Some of them though that we're starting with, they're really not recognizing the value of accessibility at all. And when I start the conversation by saying, look, go into all your PowerPoints and add alt text to all your images, just in case someday you have a student who might need that. It doesn't necessarily drive their motivation as much as some other things. And again, this is such a conversation I feel a little bit nervous about, because I don't want to in any way devalue the importance of that work and how essential it is going to be for a lot of students, but also recognizing just that as we get started with this work, how can we help instructors recognize some things that they can do today in their course that they're going to recognize are going to have an impact for all of their students. So let's just look at a couple of those types of things. I'm not going to go into examples of other items that I think are less valuable. You know, as you go through the ally list, though, I think you can do some of that work on your own, and it may be different, more valuable for instructors and students across the board versus some of those things that are going to be less valuable for everybody. You know, some of them that I think, though, some accessibility requirements, and here we have the WCAG reference there in parentheses to the accessibility guideline from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are some things that are a big deal for accessibility, that also I think make a big difference as far as making our courses more usable for everyone. The first one I have listed there is consistent navigation, use of headings in your course content, whether that be within the LMS or within documents. Helpful link text is such a big one. We have so often where we have click here or click this, which is obviously not going to be accessible, but is also problematic for so many students to kind of know where the link is going to. Color contrast is another one. You know, we have our instructional designers recognize this one as a great way to, for some of our instructors who have maybe a little bit more creativity in their course content, and sometimes might use colors that are just, I mean, not only not accessible, but just a poor user experience as far as, you know, light gray on dark gray, or just ugly colors, or different colors on every page. And we can sometimes bring accessibility in as a way to help corral those into something that's a little bit more usable. That last one, the official name is something different, but I want to talk a little bit about PDF files that don't suck. That one's a big one for us here at Utah State. As we look across, again, that spring semester, we had almost 100,000 PDF files. That was about 25% of our overall content. It's by far the most popular type of content across our courses. Maybe let me pause though right here before I go into this PDF stuff. Any comments or questions from anybody on the call today?
We did have a comment from Sherry just mentioning that she really likes the term using curb cuts and applying this more broadly to these other best practices. And we also have Paula going back to the why alt text would be beneficial to all students, and she mentions that images may have a meaning that may not be readily apparent to all students. And I think that is a really interesting one when you think about students coming from different cultures, different places around the globe. How do they understand the symbolism in images and things like that that may be outside of their cultural vantage points? Sue Donor also mentions images alt text consideration, thinking whether it's functional or decorative. So being, you know, mindful about making the distinction about when it's purely for decorative purposes. or when it's, when it's actually meaningful or functional as part of the content.
Thank you. Those are great comments. And that's one thing that, and to represent kind of the conversation I've had a little bit with Nicholas on this, is that there really is a potential for alt text on images, I think, to be useful and used by other people. I mean, one of the challenges right now is that they exist in code only, right? And so unless a student knows how to view the source of a web page or look at alt text, or are likely to do so, they're probably not going to be exposed to what that alt text is. I mean, there are ideas as far as if you're using alt text in the way of like an image caption with the caption element, that's the type of thing that absolutely is, I think, a lot more useful to consider for everyone and not just students using screen readers, for example. And generally, I think I was just referring to that alt text that is just within the code, and that certainly, again, is there for somebody who knows how to use it, and maybe in some contexts, or if you're on a low bandwidth scenario where your images aren't showing up, again, it's certainly not that it can't be useful. It's just kind of weighing the comparative usefulness of alt text in HTML versus some of these other types of accommodations. But again, that's something that I don't want to declare anything as being unuseful or something that you shouldn't do. It's just looking at a potential framework that we can consider when is something going to be more useful or less useful to a lot of students. Another example might be, adding language on a PDF document. Again, that's an official accessibility requirement, but generally irrelevant even for users of assistive technology, where it generally is able to identify the language itself. It doesn't mean that it's still not a requirement, that it might be useful in some things, but if I have a choice, if I have an hour of free time and have a choice to either add language to the language to a PDF file or go and caption some videos, I'm going to probably do that thing where I'm going to feel like I can make the most difference and kind of just help move the conversation ahead. Thank you, though. Good comments. Let me jump ahead to these PDFs and look at some of these. Again, so this is a big part of our course content. And I think, and I don't know for sure, I haven't been in higher ed for a long time. Some of you may know better than I, but that PDF used to be kind of held up as a standard or a best practice. So we had all kinds of things of teachers converting perfectly accessible, Word files or PowerPoint documents into inaccessible PDF files, or sometimes it's PDF files that have been copied or handed down from professor to student over generations. But let's just look at a couple of examples of this, the kind of PDF content these are all from courses here at Utah State that we find. And so let's look at a few of these PDFs that do suck. Here's just the first example, and this is probably fairly common. I don't know if any of you are tilting your head to the left right now. We see quite a few of these where they're copied it this way. We do also have, fortunately, ones that go to the right as well, so students don't get a crick in their neck. But these are fairly common, and for maybe a tech savvy student, it's going to be quick and easy to rotate that or to do it differently. But a lot of instructors don't take the time or maybe know how to do that, and so we have a lot of PDFs that are off to one side or the other, or sometimes all the way completely upside down. We find this on occasion. That's another example of a PDF file from a course. Here's another one that I grabbed. It's a PDF file, and if you squint really hard, you can sort of make out some of the words, but even if you zoom in there, this is just not a very readable content. Again, not only is it not going to be accessible, but it's just not going to be usable for anybody. Irony here on this one, if you look up here on the title of this book it came from, is Designing Challenging Curriculum. Somebody kind of, a little bit too, it's an apt content, I guess, for the type of PDF file that it is. And even where you have a nice clean PDF, and these are also going to be found across a lot of our courses. When you open that up on your mobile device, you're going to either have something like this, where it's going to be very small text that you have to zoom in, and then you're zooming in and you're going back and forth and back and forth. On a 20-page document, that's a lot of back and forth and back and forth. Again, this is the most common type of content, these PDF files across all of our Canvas courses. And I think a lot of accessibility professionals spend a lot of time thinking about how can we remediate or make these PDF files accessible. Now you can do that work, and I don't want to discourage anybody from doing that, but as we kind of started looking into that, the time it took to remediate a file, we were able to do some different work. And this really came as about from starting to play with Ally. But the idea here is that you take a less accessible PDF file, download the Ally, the HTML from Ally, and instead of taking time to fix up the PDF document, you just turn that into a nice clean HTML content within your LMS. This is in Canvas here, but you can see that the difference real quick there from again not a PDF that is not only inaccessible but just has all the problems for all users to something that is now accessible but also very usable. Again, that process, we just take the PDF, download the HTML from Ally. You can, if you don't have Ally, I think most of the on the call probably do, but something like Abby FineReader as well does this work fairly well. It doesn't have all of the machine learning and some of the additional special sauce that Ally adds. You're able to convert that to an HTML file, and then just taking a little bit of time to clean up the HTML. But again, Ally often is going to pull in a lot of the semantic elements on its own, depending on the quality of the HTML. And we found that it doesn't take much more or even sometimes less time to create a clean HTML document than it does to clean up a PDF file. For those of you that have done PDF remediation work, it's the kind of thing I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It's such a complex, as you get into tags and to a lot of the it requires a very specialized set of knowledge that's something we just don't expect or ask of our instructors to do in general anyways. Whereas this is something that becomes a little bit more doable, especially if you're doing the HTML in the WYSIWYG editor. Here's just another quick example of a PDF document that we turn into a nice clean HTML page. And this is something then, as soon as you open it on your mobile device, you're going to have a beautiful, responsive HTML document that's going to be easy to read. So it's going to be mobile friendly. This is also going to, in Canvas at least, you're able to track usage of HTML documents a lot better than you are able to track usage of PDF files. And so there's some advantages there. And then if any edits need to be made or you need to annotate it, it's going to be a lot easier to do. Any comments or questions on that PDF to HTML workflow?
Chris,
feedback sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Chris agreed +1, wouldn't wish on my worst enemy for the remediating of the PDFs. And obviously on the Ally side, we very much agree, and we don't really provide a lot of that instructor feedback information to instructors on how to tag because it is such a steep learning curve.
Yeah. And this process, so as far as just giving an instructor the HTML, even if it's not perfect, right? In the WYSIWYG editor, that's a lot easier of an interface for them to go through and either add headings or just correct typos, whatever that might be. So far, we've done this for 100+ files. I don't know exactly, but the feedback from both students and faculty has been very positive, and we're really excited about it. And so, and sometimes we will still link to the PDF, as you can see here. And so the inaccessible or less accessible PDF might still be available. And we, at that point, often don't take the time to make the PDF accessible. We have an accessible, clean version. And sometimes we're able to eliminate the PDF completely. I've been surprised at how often our instructors will put things like instructions for an assignment, but then they'll save it as a PDF file and upload it, which just, again, doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's something that there's a lot of content out there in that format. We're able to just convert that over to a Canvas page, and there's really no need for the PDF file anymore. Let me show you one other thing I want to talk about, that as we got into our Ally pilot and started trying things out and saw how much content there was, it was really kind of overwhelming to consider all of the files. And so one of the things we did, we used Canvas data, and I don't know if this is as much of an issue for Blackboard. It sounds like Blackboard maybe has some tools that provides some support for this. But with Canvas, there's really not a way to tell if a file is being used in a course or not. And so we ran some numbers, and this is looking at some of these old irrelevant files. And so in a lot of our courses, we had not only the current year syllabus, maybe in a PDF file, but also all of the PDF syllabi from previous years. And that's just one short little example. But as we looked across all of our content, it was less than half of the content that was stored in courses that Ally was evaluating, that our Disability Resource Center was having to remediate, was actually being used in courses. And the only way to kind of figure out what that was to go through page by page and identify, which files had links. And so we built a tool, and I'm going to go ahead and jump out and do a quick demo in Ally that helps us to, or in Canvas that helps us to identify that content that's in use versus content that isn't in use, and then be able to delete those files that aren't in use. So let me go ahead and just jump out real quick. This tool is currently only available, we built it as just on our campus, but we're working on making it available more broadly. There is a link in that reference document to a Canvas post for anyone who is a Canvas user. If you're interested in this tool or using it on your campus, feel free to go make a quick note or leave a comment there. But basically the idea of the tool in this course, it's just a demo course, but there's only a few of the courses that are being actually used. It'll go through and determine if there's a link to a file, but then you can see more generally, there's all these files that aren't being used. And so I can come over here and maybe do a search for PDF files. I can see all the PDF files that aren't being used. Let me find one that's a little bit. Let's look at our doc files. These are all the doc files that are in the course, but that are no longer being used. I can select those, click delete, and it'll quickly go through, and it does take a minute, where at this point I'm deleting 61 of these unused files. It'll show me the status of that, but then what I've done basically is eliminated 61 files that we ever have to care about for accessibility in the future. That's going to have sometimes an immediate effect on our overall, on the Ally score for that course, or even our overall scores. And we're talking about deleting hundreds and even thousands of files across a number of courses. The other thing we're able to do as well sometimes is look at the files that are in use, and then we can click on that to say and get a quick view of where that's being used. Again, this is just a demo course, but I can say, oh, yep, I'm using that file here, and I can choose to either, again, make it accessible or talk to the instructor about whether it's needed. And then the other thing the tool does is, I don't think I have any empty folders in this course, but it'll also identify where I have empty folders. Okay, and I do have 3. I can go ahead and delete those empty folders from my file section as well. And this is a tool that we initially built based on a need from our Disability Resource Center. They were just so frustrated with being given a course and knowing that a student in that course needed to make all of their files accessible, and not knowing which files they had to focus on. And so we built it for that group, but since we've done that, it's one of these tools that has been just incredibly well received across campus. So many instructors were really anxious and grateful for an opportunity to be able to clean out all of these old and unused folders from, we've been using Canvas since I think 2011, but before that, Blackboard and WebCT, and there were files from, clear back a decade ago that were still in these classes. Being able to get rid of all those files, extra files, has made things easier for our disability office, but for everybody. Okay, that's again that tool. And again, if you're interested in that, then check out that link and leave a comment in the post on the Canvas community, and we'll share more resource on that as we go forward. Another big one, this is related to the PDF content. I won't go a lot into detail here, but one of the things we've done recently is I've identified our top 25 courses, across this semester that students use, and we're just identifying kind of common problems that those courses have, that we can go in and fix. And I've been just surprised at how many instructors, and maybe some of you can relate to this, but take again a PowerPoint file that is at least somewhat accessible, and they'll save it as 6 slides to a page in a PDF file. That is something that's, and I don't even have a sample of this to bring up right here, but that is not only no longer accessible, but is also just not as usable. I mean, you'll have slides that have a whole, all kinds of words on them that are shrunk down. And at some point, a lot of instructors were told this was kind of a best practice or something they should do. Maybe PDF was a more universal format, but they're doing that instead of offering the PowerPoint file. And so it's a great opportunity for us to then have conversations with those teachers to say, hey, why don't you just offer the PowerPoint file directly to the students, if they really want to also make that available. But we can also share that if students want to print that out for themselves, they can do so, and they can do it with 2 slides per page, 4 slides per page, or whatever they want to do. And so just encouraging the use of native files whenever possible is something that I think is just a big deal. And I think there used to be more of a challenge with maybe having a PowerPoint file and a student not having access to PowerPoint. And anymore, I think that's generally going to be irrelevant, whether that's accessing PowerPoint on a campus computer or even being able to upload it into Microsoft or to Google Drive. There's just so many other there's so many ways the student can access a PowerPoint file that there's just really not much of a reason for teachers to do that. And this is one where when they hear that from us, that a lot of times they're so grateful, because the current workflow is to make a change in a PowerPoint file, save it as a PDF, upload the PDF to your LMS, and then again you need to make a change. You then save it as PDF. And it's just such a cumbersome extra step that just makes things less usable in general for everybody, as well as less accessible. And so that's what we focused on a lot as well.
Christopher, one question that came in, I don't know if you've tested this much, but have you looked at PowerPoint on mobile devices and how well that plays on mobile?
Yeah, I've done some testing on that. I've found that I mean, it's certainly better than the PDF file. And then I think it's going to depend a lot on whether you're accessing it on an iOS device or an Android device, and then also whether you're accessing it within like the LMS app or the browser. But generally, I found that PowerPoint files open up just fine, and are able to be fairly responsive to the environment. And I don't have an example I can pull up right now. And if some of you test that and find otherwise, I mean, I'd love to hear that. But the testing I have done, which is somewhat limited, I found that PowerPoints open up great on a mobile device. Okay. Another one, I'm just going to kind of skip through these slides quickly. But it's just, again, headings and helping people to understand how headings work, the difference between having for a user with assistive technology, or any user, just looking at a big, this is the same text on this text file versus here, and how much value headings add to all of us. But then making sure that when we do that, we're actually using headings in Microsoft Word or in Google Drive. And that's another easy one where the value of headings is one that so many people know that exists. Maybe they've never used that bar, though, but that once people start using headings, actual headings rather than just making their text bigger and bolding it, makes such a difference. And it can make it easier as far as editing a document, viewing an outline of a document. There's just a lot of value to doing that beyond accessibility. When I use Google Drive a lot, and always just turn on this outline view, and it helps me to get a quick view of a document and navigate it. That kind of thing is only available through headings. Again, just wanted to spend a minute on that one. The other big thing I think that we try to do is, I've been able to, some of the conversations we've had with faculty, and even though faculty are tenured faculty even have all kinds of publications, but you bring up the topic of accessibility, and sometimes they're just a little bit nervous. Even some, I had a professor who's now a good friend that had done some work on accessibility, but he was really nervous just to reach out and ask for help because he was worried he was doing it wrong, or hadn't, and just letting people know that this accessibility work we're doing is always just going to be a journey. And so there's always going to be something more you can do with accessibility for sure, but there's always something small that you can do today that's going to make your content more useful for some students. And just trying to take off and ease the anxiety that some people feel about compliance or being doing, whether they're uh, breaking a law or going to get sued, and just letting people know that, for the most part, we have systems and resources in place to help you when there's that accommodation request. This other work we're doing is just work that you can do to become a better teacher and help your students out in general. It's this idea of inclusion and diversity, and making sure that we're tapping into offices or efforts or initiatives on campus that are talking about inclusion, whether it's inclusion of any type, right? And making sure that accessibility and students with disabilities or students with different learning preferences are part of that conversation. One of the ways that we think about this sometimes is that it's been helpful, I think, and that a lot of professors can really recognize and identify with, is this, in the US at least, if you go back 50 to 60 years, it used to be that individuals with disabilities were generally excluded from society and from the classroom, right? Is that you had a school maybe for students without disabilities and an entirely separate school, if there was a school at all. In some cases there wasn't for students with disabilities. And then we came into this idea of mainstreaming, where we would say, let's maybe bring those students with disabilities into the same classroom. And this is generally the kind of atmosphere that my oldest brother, Patrick, started with in grade school, where he was in the same school but in a separate classroom, and they kind of did their own thing, had their own classes, maybe got together at lunch type of a thing, but were generally separated. Then we started talking about inclusion, and bringing students with disabilities into the classroom. And this is something that's been a great step, and it's where a lot of us are still at as far as working to make our course content inclusive. But I really think there's even a step kind of beyond inclusion, where we stop thinking about purple squares or green circles, and we just recognize more and more that we're all students, or we're all human beings. We all want to learn. We all learn in different ways. And that a lot of this work that we can do around captioning, around headings, around a lot of this kind of accessibility work is really going to be it's just good teaching. It's good usability. It's going to make you a better teacher. It's going to allow all of your students to perform a little bit better in your classroom. And that kind of framing of the issue has really helped us with a lot of our conversations here. And so just in wrapping up, and then we'll leave time for any more questions that anybody might have, but reactive compliance is essential. If you're getting started with accessibility, you have to start here. You have to make sure that you're taking care of the specific needs of specific students with disabilities. But even if your primary concern is for students with disabilities, to recognize that there are always going to be a significant number of students with disabilities on your campus that you never know about, that never register with the office, that never submit any accommodation requests. And so as we start to get a handle on that reactive compliance work, just working more and more on this proactive inclusion, it's a tremendous way to get people excited about accessibility, and start to see the work of inclusion as being important and valuable for all of their students. And as you kind of get people with their foot in the door on that, you can then find more and more of your accessibility champions, individuals who really care about this work and want to do more of it, to really working towards moving towards a more inclusive campus. And just sometimes, for me at least, and this is just a little bit vulnerable, I guess. But one of the things that I sometimes have struggled with, even as an accessibility advocate, is to go in and I sit down with a professor and they are just spent, right? I mean, they've got 200 papers they have to grade in 3 days, and they've got all these committee assignments and wrestling with students and all of these challenges. And I say, hey, I've got one more thing to add to your pile. And sometimes I found myself kind of struggling with that, even internally, and saying, like, how can I help them feel like this is more important when they've got so much going on, and to help them make this a priority. And as we can kind of focus on those things that are really going to benefit all of those students, it's just an incredible way to start those conversations and to get people started on the path to more accessible courses. So that's been really helpful, just the way I frame the issues and the attitude I bring into those conversations. With that, I just want to wrap up, and then if there's any other questions anybody has, please do feel free to go to that document for additional resources. John did have a post on the committee about this. I'm also happy to kind of follow up with any questions there if we have one, if we want to have any discussion, but I'll wrap up it there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen unless there's any questions about anything I've shared, and jump over to the chat for the next part of this.
Thanks so much, Christopher. I wish we could give you a round of applause, but I don't know how that works on a webinar. But really informative, really nice view into some of these accessibility best practices. There you go, Eric. Yeah, we've got virtual emoji applause going. Nice.
Thank you so much. If anybody does have questions or wants to talk about anything, I'm happy to talk, probably more than you want to listen. And so I always love having these conversations. Question from Paul I just saw. Have you had issues with courses that are offered online that use inaccessible technology, especially courses that offer lab-like experiences? Absolutely. And so there'll sometimes be, and I'm going to speak specifically to a course that might use a separate type of software. And maybe it's to do a virtual dissection of a mouse or whatever type of a thing, and that's one, again, where this conversation comes into place and helps us with our prioritization, is that where we have an accommodation request for a course like that, then it's top priority, right? We have to figure out a way to make sure that experience is going to be accessible. However, if we don't have that accommodation request in yet on that course, then it may be something where we raise it with the professor, let them know there may be issues with that technology, but not necessarily spend all of the time trying to make that accessible that we would if there was an accommodation request. And instead, we'd maybe focus on, are your documents in that course usable and accessible? Do you have your your videos captioned, things like that? And so the goal isn't going to be necessarily 100% accessibility across all those courses, but just, are they usable, and is there a way to make them accessible, if or when the need comes up. So that answers your question, but that's kind of the strategy we take. Publisher materials is a great question. So how do we deal with those publisher materials? And so this is the idea that Pearson, for example, might have a textbook that the faculty will use the LTI connection, so students then go to Canvas, but then go out to the publisher to access those materials. I mean, first of all, reach out to the publisher. Fortunately, more and more publishers are at least aware of accessibility. And I've found often that when we're able to reach out to them and say, we have an accommodation request in this course, this student can't use your materials unless alt text strata to all the images, for example. Many of those organizations have their own internal prioritization system that's able to kind of help them make their content more accessible. Now again, this is assuming, and most of the major publishers are going to be a little bit more responsive that way, where sometimes we're even finding that material is accessible to start with. Where that's not the case, I mean, there's other things and you can do and ways you can work on capturing or making that materials accessible that I probably would be better shared in an email rather than on a webcast that's going to be published. But we do feel a lot of leeway to kind of make something accessible for a specific student in a specific situation, even if it requires um, going outside the lines a little bit in what we need to do. And so, but certainly reach out to those to the publisher first off, and there's other great resources that are out there that take publisher materials and help in making some of them accessible as well. And if you have questions about specific things or whatnot, please do shoot me an email, and I'm happy to get that for you. As far as untagged documents from library databases, and again, libraries are many of the vendors that provide documents to libraries are doing a better and better job of making their content accessible, but there's a lot of it that isn't. And so we do find, though, often that the library often has a more accessible version than what a professor is using in a course. So many of the professor's course materials are going to be from when they were a student, maybe. And so we'll often encourage them to go to the library to start. But then from there, we'll just download the library material and then either make that document accessible or in some cases convert that document to an HTML document. Because, yeah, they're certainly not perfect and there's a lot of room for improvement there. But we would often just download that document and then either make it accessible or use Ally to convert it to HTML and make sure it's accessible that way. Any other questions? I just added that link again. I'd be more than happy to chat with anybody if you have questions later as a follow-up. But if there's no more questions, thank you so much to everybody for coming and for the great questions. I appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you everybody so much. And again, thank you, Christopher, for taking the time and walking us through some of these great strategies. It's really exciting to see. And thank you, as always, for your contributions to the user group community. It really brings a lot. And so we're all very appreciative of the time that you take. And so the recording, we will make it available on the user group site if you want to revisit the recording. And otherwise, hope to see you at the next one on October 3rd.